Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 90 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is The Good Wife, an interview with Jennifer Gladysz. My name is Richard Johannesson.
And I'm Matt Sabatello.
Today's podcast guest is Jennifer Gladysz. Jennifer Gladysz is a 46-year-old health coach and Lyme co-pilot from Joshua Tree, California. Ms. Gladysz and her husband, Keith, lived in upstate New York when he first started to exhibit the symptoms of a tick disease. Mr. Gladysz fell off of a horse and had issues with his neck and his back. The pain from his injury spread to other parts of his body and especially congregating in his knees. He tested positive for Lyme disease and was given doxycycline, but it didn't help. Mr. Gladysz, a musician, couldn't make music, and he couldn't be around his two children. His sensitivity to sound was too severe. The couple finally went to the famous Dr. Daniel Cameron, who put Mr. Gladysz on long-term antibiotics. Through the help of his wife, Mr. Gladysz also benefited from the Dr. Stephen Buhner herbal protocol, cannabis, and the carnivore diet. Hey, Jen, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me here. I'm really excited to talk to you guys about our experiences.
Well, we're really blessed to have you on today, and we'd like you to please begin the podcast by introducing yourself to our audience.
My name's Jen Gladysz, and currently I live in Joshua Tree. I'm from New York, and my husband, Keith Gladysz, has had Lyme for the last 10 years, and he's been in remission for the last year.
Do you and Keith have any children?
We do. We have 3 kids. I have an older daughter who's 24 and who's living in Buffalo, and I have 2 younger kids, an 8-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl.
We're glad at least some members of your family stayed in New York. I mean, the rest of you decided to abandon us for the West Coast. So thank you for leaving one behind.
I'm still trying to get her to move out here. So fingers crossed.
So Jen, before you left us and went to the left coast, can you share with us what you were doing here in New York?
Yes. So Keith and I both grew up on Long Island. Then we lived in the city for a number of years. And we had a pet care business in Brooklyn for 15 years. At a certain point in the business, I was able to work remotely. So we moved upstate to first West Shokan, then New Paltz, and then Kingston. So all in like the Catskill Mountain area.
And when did Keith first begin to show the symptoms of a tick disease?
Well, in 2009, so when we moved upstate, we did the full country life. We bought 9 acres and we had a huge garden and we had horses and chickens and llamas and we were riding horses. And one day he fell off our horse, and it wasn't a bad fall, but it was enough where he had some neck pain after he fell off the horse. And the neck pain lingered longer than we would have thought. And I kept saying, I think something else is going on that's weird. And he kept saying, oh, no, it's just from the horse. I just fell and hit my neck and it just hurt. So, he did all the normal things you do when you hurt yourself, ice in the beginning, heat, stretching, just trying to take care of himself. But it still didn't go away. And then the pain started to travel to different parts of his body, especially his knees. And we just began to really suspect, something is going on here.
And before you go too far forward with that portion of your story, which we're going to come back to, I want to get a little bit more of a sense of what you were doing and what Keith was doing and what your kids were doing prior to the fall.
Mm-hmm.
So you indicated that you had a business that allowed you to work remotely and you were able to move upstate. What was Keith doing at that time professionally?
So Keith's a musician and an artist. So he was making music. In the beginning, he helped me with our dog walking business, but then I took it over. But his main profession is music and art.
So what kinds of things were you and Keith pursuing professionally before he had fallen off the horse and suffered his injury?
Well, we were actually at this point, I think, his music career has kind of taken different, um, different ways. So, he was in a band at first, and then it was him and myself playing music together. So, at this point we were traveling, playing shows. He was recording music. I was mainly running the dog walking business. We were both taking care of our children. Well, really at this point it was just Emma. So it was our older daughter. And, we were just living our dream country life up there, in the mountains, taking care of our animals and running around in the woods with bare feet. And looking back now, I'm like, why were we doing that? We should have known better. But so we were very active, before moving upstate, that we would go upstate as many weekends as we could, camping, hiking. It was our dream to be up there in nature.
What kind of a dad was Keith to your then oldest child? Was he very involved in her life? Was he a very active dad, or was he a different kind of dad?
He was a very involved dad. Since we both work from home, we both try to spend a lot of time with our kids. It's, a priority for us.
So my sense is the way you're describing this sort of picturesque life that you had, you, your husband, and your daughter all moved upstate New York. You were living in this beautiful environment. You were able to work from home. You were able to spend a lot of time together and support each other through various professional pursuits. And then Keith fell off the horse.
Yes.
And everything changed?
And things started to change. It was gradual. And I think that that's part of the problem. I've been thinking a lot lately about denial. And I think there was a level of denial. And also, we didn't know better. But there was a level of denial about what was going on and whether he was actually sick. And not just our own denial, but, from the doctors as well. So he fell off the horse, and it took us probably 2 years, maybe a year and a half before we actually got the diagnosis that it was Lyme.
So let's pause there for a second, Jen.
Yeah.
You grew up on Long Island. Your husband grew up on Long Island. I'm sure ticks were a part of your lives. So tell us what you knew about ticks and what you knew about Lyme disease at the time things began to change from this beautiful life that you had set up for yourselves.
Yes. So growing up, I remember my mom always saying, ticks are dangerous. And my mom was like my Girl Scout leader. We would go camping. So I've always been out in the woods in nature. My mom is a nature person also. But she would always say, oh, ticks, be really careful. Don't get ticks on you. Check for ticks. But there was never any talk of Lyme at that point. I think it was more like Rocky Mountain spotted fever or other tick-borne diseases that are a little bit more common knowledge. Not that a little bit more common knowledge. It's just that they're dangerous. Okay, so fast forward to high school. I had 2 friends get Lyme disease, and I remember them just putting that information. I also went to a very small high school, but putting that information out there. These 2 girls got Lyme disease. They had their antibiotics, and they were better. That was what we heard. Fast forward to moving upstate, we knew Lyme was there, and we knew that there were ticks there, but we didn't realize, I think, especially from that high school experience where, my 2 friends, they were out of school for a couple of days, they took their antibiotics and they were better. That's what you think is going to happen. Like, okay, well, if it happens, I'll just take my antibiotics and I'll get better.
Now, Keith falls off the horse. His health is beginning to decline. You're going from doctor to doctor trying to get a diagnosis. At any time as his symptoms were developing, did you think that he may have had Lyme disease?
I don't think so, because I just don't think we knew what it was. And I can't really remember. I think it was just eventually a doctor was like, hey, let's test for Lyme. There was nobody else had suggested it to us. We just didn't think, as I said, it was like a level of denial and a level of just not knowing. And then that doctor told us, oh, let's test for Lyme, and some other things. I can't remember what else we were testing for, but just let's do this test. And then it came back positive, thankfully. And, we'd never had, the rash, the tick bite. We'd never seen anything like that. We just didn't know.
So Jen, we'd like to explore with you what the doctor carousel was like. So your husband falls off the horse. He has his St. Paul moment where, things are beginning to change. He's getting sicker. And so when's the first time you go to the doctor, and why do you go to the doctor?
The first time was just for the neck, to see, to make sure everything was okay. It wasn't a big deal. And did the usual treatment, like, oh, okay, well, you're just stiff because, you fell off this horse, and nothing was broken. Nothing was, there wasn't any really diagnosis. It's just you fell off the horse, you're bruised, you have, your muscles hurt. And, it's a little hazy. Like, I can't remember. I just know that we went to a few different doctors, but it was mostly for that. Like, what's happening muscular or bone, or, we didn't think it was a sickness. We just thought, it was an injury from falling.
So Jen, now that you have a bit of a perspective, I'm going to ask you to think about whether or not you believe Keith may have been harboring the bacteria for maybe a good portion of his entire life before that, because he was bitten by a tick during his childhood or some other time on Long Island? Or do you think he was bitten by a tick just before he had begun to show the symptoms after the horse incident?
I suspect that either on one of those weekends going upstate, or, once we moved up there, that he got bitten. That's my suspicion. I mean, when I say we were running around the woods barefoot, like, like being in nature, like that's what we were doing a lot. And I have a feeling, Keith meditates, and he, I think he goes out in the woods and sits down, and I just suspect that, and it's possible that he had been bitten before in his life, but I suspect it happened once we moved up.
But it sounds to me that you suspect that the chronic Lyme disease took off because he suffered the traumatic fall. So I'm trying to get a sense from you of why you think it may have been, the tick bite might have taken place shortly before the fall rather than some other time during his life.
Keith has always played basketball. Like, that was his big thing. He's always been an active person. He's had other injuries before. When we had our pet care business, in the beginning, it was just us walking dogs. And then it grew into this thing where we had, 50 people working for us, and we weren't walking dogs anymore. So he'd been very active, and there had been other injuries before that didn't act the same as this injury. So I would think if he had been bitten as a child, that he would have been sicker sooner. But it is definitely possible that he, was bitten. I mean, we've been camping and hiking for years, so it's possible it could have happened at any time then.
So Jennifer, after the pain started to migrate from Keith's neck and went into his knees and other parts of his body, what were the doctors saying was the cause of that new migrating pain that could probably no longer be associated with the fall?
They would just look at, like, oh, his knees are just sore. Bad knees do run in Keith's family.
It was your primary care physician who ultimately recommended that Keith get tested for Lyme disease, right?
Yeah, and I think I just don't know why that wasn't the first thing. And again, it goes back to denial in my mind. It's just this denial that this thing is happening, that people are getting sick.
And Jennifer, once he got diagnosed, what was the treatment course prescribed by his primary care physician?
3 weeks of antibiotics, and it was doxycycline.
And did Keith feel any better at all throughout that 3-week window?
there was some improvement. And I think that is typical of many of the things that we've tried, is that he would have a little bit of initial improvement and then get worse.
And once this 3-week course of antibiotics was over, which I think all of us now know was not adequate for Keith, what was he feeling at that point? Was he feeling a temporary relief, or was he still in a bad spot at the end of that 3-week period?
There was a window of temporary relief, and then the symptoms started to slowly come back.
And what was Keith's primary care physician saying now that he was treated with the 3 weeks of doxycycline? The doctor probably felt that should have been enough to cure the Lyme. What was happening, and what was that interaction like with the doctor and you and Keith?
We went back to her a number of times, and she just kept saying, oh, he's had his 3 weeks of antibiotics. He's better. And then it took a number of times, but I remember there was one appointment, pretty much the last time I think we even bothered seeing her. She finally admitted to me that he was still sick, but she just looked me in the eye and said there was nothing else she could do for us. And it was just, mind-blowing and, demoralizing.
Prior to this point where she acknowledged that Keith had a real physical illness, it's still at this point, right at the end, did she ever indicate prior to that it could have been a mental health illness because the treatment was done and she felt he was cured?
She did not, but he saw top infectious disease doctor in the city, and I cannot remember whether it was Columbia or NYU, but that doctor retested Keith. He came back positive on one band, and the doctor said, Keith's not sick anymore. He'll always show a little positive because of the antibodies, but this is a negative test, and it's all in your head. And it was just crushing.
How was Keith being affected by these progressing symptoms? Was he able to pursue his career as a musician? Was he able to be the dad that he had been before? How are these events changing him?
So it did progress somewhat slowly. And then also, I think, again, our denial of how sick he was. So, we were young people, not expecting either one of us was going to be chronically ill. And the doctors, there's still a question of whether chronic Lyme disease exists, although we know it absolutely does, but there's still that question out there in the mainstream medical community. So all of those things kind of contributed to us just not really facing it as much as we probably should have. And since the regular medicine wasn't helping us and he was still not feeling well, we did now start our path to find different ways to have him feel better. But he's starting to increasingly need to sleep, need to take time for himself, mood issues happening, chronic pain. So those things are all happening at that time while we're still trying to pretend like everything's okay, and then at the same time seeking other means of treatment.
Jennifer, some people that have Lyme disease have what they describe as Lyme rage, where whether it's their symptoms or neurological condition, they get this rage they never had before in their life. Did Keith ever experience anything like that?
Yes, I think he definitely had some anger issues. And, there was a time when that absolutely affected our daughter, maybe more so than me. When you have a teenager, it can be challenging. So I think his anger would come out at her. And there'd be times when I would pull him aside and we'd talk about it. And I would say, hey, maybe we should just, your anger is affecting things here. If she's doing something that needs instruction or correction or, some parental advice, maybe I should be the one to do that.
So what advice would you give to our listeners who are going through Lyme rage currently? What could you provide to them as a tip based on your observations with Keith to help them get through it and beyond it?
Well, Keith did a lot of hard work and through his whole journey. And I would say meditation was hugely helpful for him. And he did work, at this time, he was working with a teacher who did, guided meditation, and he was part of a meditation group. So that was very helpful.
Jennifer, backing up a little bit, because you mentioned that you went to New York City and saw some of the best doctors where the infectious disease doctor told Keith that you don't have Lyme anymore. You're always going to have a band positive because of the antibodies and it's in your head. But before that, you actually had found an osteopath locally who had prescribed Keith an additional, I think, 6 weeks of antibiotics. Can you walk us through that piece?
Yes. I think actually the osteopath happened post seeing that doctor. And that was a turning point when we found that osteopath who would do these osteopathic sessions with Keith, and it would help his body feel better. And it was just, and an osteopath is actually, medical school doctor, MD. So that osteopath told Keith that he believed that Keith was still sick. He said, I don't know what it is, whether we're calling it chronic Lyme or, what it is. I don't know why it happens. For some people that it seems to linger, but I believe that you're really ill. And that was, just so helpful to have somebody tell you that they believe you. And he was willing to give Keith 6 weeks of antibiotics, but he couldn't give him more because he was afraid he would lose his license.
So I want to learn more about what it was like for Keith now. He was already on the 3 weeks of antibiotics. He got a little bit better, had a little period afterwards where he was feeling better, and then declined again. Did this now 6 weeks of antibiotics have any additional improvement with his health, or did he sort of plateau at that point and not get any better?
So again, it was that little bit of improvement that makes you feel like, oh, okay, we might be on the right track here, but then it doesn't last. And then, the wind is taken out of your sails yet again, because this treatment, didn't help.
And as time went on, Keith just continued to decline now. So post this 6 week period of doxycycline from the osteopath, things got so bad with his sound and light sensitivity that you actually had to, I think, separate your locations in the home. So can you talk to us about how his symptoms worsened and how it impacted your family?
Yes. So at this point, it's been a little while, a little bit of time until we get to this point. I had my son 8 years ago, and when I had Flint, it was like we still didn't think Keith was that sick at that point, so we had a baby. And then we did a little bit of traveling, and then but at this point we had decided to move from this house on 9 acres to a smaller house in New Paltz. So we moved there, we had our son, my daughter went off to college. So Keith's still having problems, but we're still somewhat functioning. Then we decide to move again, and we moved to Kingston. And I had my daughter, who was a surprise, but a happy surprise. But Keith was more sick at this point. He was able to help me through a difficult pregnancy. But once she came, that's when things really took a big downward spiral, where we were living in a mother-daughter house. So we had a small apartment downstairs and then the main house upstairs. I was, raising 2 young children, and Keith was walking with a cane. He had social anxiety. He couldn't be around the kids because his sound sensitivity was so bad that he would just have to run away. And it's difficult to tell 2 little kids that you have to be quiet So we were living separately, and I was, and he would spend as much time with the kids as he could, but it was not much time at all. And, he missed the kids, and he missed spending time with him. He was also sleeping a lot, and I would go downstairs to take care of him, and, he'd be in this dark bedroom, sleeping many, many hours a day, just in pain. And, that was the darkest time.
And I'd like to talk to you about the contrast between who Keith was before he got Lyme disease and now the Keith that we hear you describing as a guy who's living separate from his children, staying in the dark, not playing music, not being a good husband. Yeah. It's a really stark contrast that I think we need to emphasize. So just share with us a little bit what kind of dad Keith was and what kind of husband he was and what kind of a professional was he before he had gotten sick, so we can compare it to what you just described for us.
Yes. So Keith is like a super sweet guy. He loves his children, loves spending time with them. When we're at the playground, like, kids flock to him. Like, they know he loves to play, and he does. He's better at it than I am. Like, I'm not the best player, but the kids just love to spend time with him. In terms of music, he's focused, he's driven. When this all happened, his career was on the upswing, things were happening, and he loves to he's just focused. He's just an amazing musician, and he loves to make music. And he was always a social person, loves to talk to people, loves to, connect with people, just like an all around great guy that people, like to hang out with. And then an active person, played basketball, loves to go to the beach, loves to go camping, all of those things out in nature. We used to kayak all the time.
We have this athletic, outdoorsy man who is kind, who loved his children, who loved his wife, who, created this environment with you where you would have the ability to spend a lot of time together, and then it crashes, right? He's now an 80-year-old man hiding in the dark, not playing music, not interacting with his children, just, isolated from all of you.
Yeah. And that isolation, like, there was a number of years where none of us could be social. Like, we would just be home, and we couldn't have friends over, and we couldn't, we would travel to see family sometimes, for the holidays or whatever. And my mom's on Long Island, and, so we would still try to keep that up as much as we could. But, there was a time where we were all hermits.
So how is this affecting you?
It was very stressful.
So Jen, how is that stress presenting itself? You now have 3 children, 1 in college, 2 younger children.
Yeah.
You have a business that you're running. You have a husband that you're caring for. How is this affecting you?
Yeah. So I am the kind of person that pushes everything down and just gets the job done. And I would just look at what needed to happen and make it happen, but completely stressed, emotional eating for sure, emotional drinking. I'm holding it together for the kids mostly. Stop taking care of myself. My self-care went out the window. I didn't have a haircut for like 2 years. I held it together. And, I had this business where I had 50 people working for me and depending on me. So it felt like there were people depending on me everywhere I turned. And I just wanted to make sure, I provided what they needed and didn't let anybody down. But to my own detriment, gaining weight, not feeling well, and just stressed.
So how did you ultimately manage this stress, and what impact did that have on your capacity to parent your 2 young children?
It was difficult, but again, like, I wouldn't let my kids down. I just think I took the hits more than anybody else. So I just made sure that they had what they needed. I do think it was difficult because we didn't socialize as much. And so the kids, I mean, they were young, so it was okay. But at the same time, it would have been nice for them to have some friends and do more things. But I did really try to hold it together so that they didn't be impacted. I think, they were missing their dad. That was horrible. And I just didn't want any other area to be lacking for them. So I just tried to give them everything I could.
So Jen, did you have any caretaker Lyme rage? Did you get angry at your husband? Were you angry at all as a consequence of, your life being a disaster at that point?
I was never angry at Keith. I do have to admit, I think, oh my God, this is going to make me cry, but I think there was one point where he wasn't quite so sick just yet, but he was definitely sick, and we had heard from the doctor like, oh, this is all in your head. And I do remember having that feeling like, is this all in his head? And that's a terrible thing to admit, but there was a time where I felt that because I didn't know where he went. So there was that, but I was never angry at him. I was more angry at the system.
Jennifer, what was the difference in childhood that your older daughter had versus the childhood that your younger children had because their dad was so sick?
He was more there for her when she was younger. And, we were able to do more things as a family then. But then when she was in high school and, the rage started, she did catch that more than my kids now, because I think by the time my younger kids came around, we were a little bit more aware of that anger and what was causing it. And also he couldn't, so she got the anger, but then they got the absence because he couldn't be near them. So I think that would be kind of the main difference.
Well, what about some of the parenting decisions you made? For example, I understand from our pre-roll conversation that you had made some decisions about your lawn, you made some decisions about your animals that seemed to be different for your older child than it was for your younger children. Can you share some of that with us and some of the decisions you made after learning about Lyme?
Yes. So my older daughter, we would take her hiking. She still loves camping and hiking to this day. She would always be out in nature, especially once we moved upstate. We didn't limit that because we didn't realize that there was a risk. Thankfully, as far as we know, she wasn't bitten by a tick. She doesn't have symptoms of Lyme disease, but she kind of had a more carefree out in nature sort of childhood. But then my older kids, when we moved to Kingston, even before we moved to Kingston, I would I wouldn't let them touch grass. I wouldn't let them walk in the woods. And we lived in an area where that's what you do. It's the country and it's Catskill Mountains and you go camping. And so we didn't do that with them when they were that little. And then once we moved to Kingston, we ripped up our whole lawn and filled it with rocks. And our neighbors thought we were crazy. Their friends came over and said, "Are your neighbors from Nevada?" And they just didn't understand why we did that. But I couldn't let them outside on the grass feeling comfortable. There was one time there was a park near us where we lived and we could walk there. And the park, I felt okay because it had, it didn't have grass. It had wood chips. I mean, I don't know, maybe chicks hang out in wood chips, but I felt okay with them out there. But one day we walked across a lawn to get there, and there was a tick on my son's head, and it didn't bite him. I got it off, and then that was the last time I let them touch grass. I wouldn't let them go on the grass after that. And I didn't want them growing up. I mean, I love nature. My husband loves nature. My older daughter loves nature. Like, our family loves camping and loves being outside. I did not want to raise Flint and Snow to be afraid to be outdoors. And I just feel like it's such an important part of being a human being to be out in nature. So I just ripped up the grass so we could be outside.
Jennifer, can you talk us through how you ultimately found Dr. Cameron, who is probably one of the best Lyme litter doctors in the country?
We, through this whole time, I kept researching. And there was a point in time, Keith definitely had neurological issues from the Lyme, these mood issues and anxiety and depression. And there was a point in time when I said to him, let me do all the research, because you can go, when you go online, you can go down the rabbit hole and you can find all sorts of crazy things. And some of it's true and some of it's not. And I feel like when you have a brain fog and when you're not thinking straight and you're so ill and you don't feel well, it's hard to do your own research and to be able to weed through like anything, what works and what doesn't, and what sounds crazy and what doesn't. So I said to him, let me do the research. And so I took over that for him. And we just I kept researching and trying to find, what would work. And at that point, we were still trying to find a regular medical doctor to help us. But, there was a lot of discredit out there. Doctors had lost their licenses. There's the message that Lyme literate doctors are quacks. So, as you're going through this disease, you're still coming from what you've learned growing up, that when you're sick, you go to the doctor and they have the knowledge. They went to medical school. They're the experts. They're the ones that know, they can fix you. You get sick, you take a pill, you get better. So we were still trying to find a doctor to do that for us. But I was afraid of Lyme literate doctors because of this discredit, the message that discredits them. But finally, you get to that point where you will try anything. And I said, we found first was Dr. Horowitz and his book, You Can Get Better. And, I was like, Keith, we have to see Dr. Horowitz, but you can't see Dr. Horowitz anymore. I don't know if that's changed, but at the time you couldn't get an appointment with him or anybody. At that point he said, I'm going to have people that you can come and see, but it wasn't an option at the time. So then I said, okay, well, let's keep looking to find, another, top Lyme literate doctor that you can go see. So at that point I found Dr. Cameron.
Talk to us about what it was like with Dr. Cameron compared to all the other doctors, the osteopath, your primary care physician, and how it was different seeing a Lyme litter doctor versus a regular normal doctor you would see routinely throughout your life.
Well, it was, first of all, it felt better because, they would admit that you were actually ill. He did a in-depth questionnaire about Keith's symptoms, and it was more about like a clinical diagnosis than about testing at that point. Dr. Cameron went through all the symptoms and kind of figured out, okay, you definitely have, Lyme, and then these are some of the co-infections you may have, and let's treat you based on your symptoms and your, what we understand about Lyme and co-infections.
And Jennifer, what was the treatment plan that Dr. Cameron put Keith on after that first visit?
He went on and then the other thing obviously is that he was willing to give us long-term antibiotics, and that was the treatment plan. So he put Keith, I believe the first one was doxycycline. He did go on a number of different antibiotics. There was something that was an anti-malarial, and they just tried different antibiotics, but it was long-term. I believe he was on antibiotics a year and a half.
What was that like for Keith, being on antibiotics for a year? Did his health progressively increase? Were there ups and downs? Was he having adverse effects because it was, impacting his gut health?
Yeah, he absolutely had, gut issues. We did the probiotics, as recommended, but, the doxycycline especially was hard on his stomach, and on his body. I try to think about, was he getting better at that point or not? And it just felt like he wasn't getting worse anymore for a time. But he definitely didn't feel well because of the antibiotics.
After that 1 year period, how did he feel? I mean, I'm just curious to see, do you feel the 1 year of antibiotics was worthwhile and it had a significant improvement in Keith's health overall?
We did not feel that the antibiotics were working well. But we also didn't feel like we had any other options. And there was a point where we felt desperate to try something else. And this is the point when I started research. And so again, and I found first a book on cannabis for Lyme by Shelley White, and then which led me to Stephen Buhner's book, Healing Lyme. And so throughout this time, Keith was taking cannabis. And I found this book, Cannabis for Lyme, and I read this book and I said, Keith, this is medicine. That's why you're taking this. It's why it's medicine. You should be taking this. So that kind of helped take that out of the closet. And then,
but Jen, let's stop there for a second with the use of was he using marijuana? Was he using cannabis? Was it prescribed? How did he get that?
So at that point, he was just buying it, from a friend and smoking it, I believe. And that helped him to feel a little better, helped kind of manage his pain symptoms. I just think he was he was using it and it was making him feel better. So he stuck with it, but not really thinking of it as medicine. And then, and he'd been a marijuana user for a long time. It's not like that was something new for him, but just more recreationally than, medically. So he was just using that and it was making him feel better just in terms of pain management. So when I read this book, the light bulb went on and it just, there's so many properties to cannabis that helps, and I'm not really very good on the scientific aspect of it, but, that book really helped us both to look at it as medicine and to, instead of smoking it, to now start ingesting it. And we would make olive oil infused cannabis and from the flower that he would get from somebody. And, it was all illegal because we were in New York, but it was worth the risk because it, helped him to feel better.
And you were doing this while Keith was on the antibiotics for the 1 year period, and it was sort of helping. And at the time, he just thought it was more of like a recreational, not medicinal value. And then you had that sort of epiphany that, hey, this is medicine. It's not just a recreational thing to do. And
yes,
when you finally went off the antibiotics with Keith after that 1 year, you continued to use cannabis as a medicine, and then you found the herbal protocol by Stephen Buhner and started to use that. So how did the combination of Stephen Buhner's herbal protocol and cannabis ultimately help Keith in his recovery? Because it seems like antibiotics for the 3 weeks and then the 6 weeks and now the 1 year really didn't do much other than just sort of stop the progression of his illness and never really helped treat the illness.
Yes. So, so to back up a little bit, when I found the cannabis book, and then that led me to the Buhner book, because she talks about, how it was kind of the similar story where she was like kind of out of desperation, reached for the cannabis, helped her feel better, found the herbal protocol from Buhner, and that helped cure her, or I don't know what we say at this point, but remission, but her Lyme, it helped her Lyme. So the Buhner and the cannabis came to me at the same time as we'd been doing the antibiotics. It was like a few months in. And the Buhner protocol, we tried, that was really out of desperation, because at that point I had no training. I didn't know what I was doing. We were not sure whether Keith would live. That's how bad he was at this point. And it's scary when your loved one is so sick and you don't know what to do. You're seeing this doctor who's a top doctor in the field, who's giving you antibiotics that are not really helping, and not having used any herbal medicine before. But the nice thing about the Buhner protocol, and he's very clear about this, is that you can use it when you're taking antibiotics, which helped us feel okay about just trying it. And we went through his book based on his symptoms. I don't know which co-infections Keith had, and nobody could ever tell us that information. And I don't even think they don't have names for every, co-infection that's out there. So we just went down the list based on his symptoms and used the protocol. And within a few weeks of starting the protocol, Keith improved. It was very clear what was helping.
I'm sorry, Jennifer, this was literally after years and years of Keith's health continuing to decline. And at best, you pause the decline of his symptoms by taking long-term antibiotics, which is also having really negative effects on his body as well. And you finally find this herbal therapy, which was like a last-ditch resort, and it works.
Yeah. It was amazing.
Did Keith have any herxing or side effects or symptoms that go along with the herbs?
Yes, he definitely had times where he felt like herxing or like felt worse, but kind of clear that he was still getting better. And we would just, adjust his dosage based on what was happening, or if there were new symptoms, because I feel like one of the things we learned was, okay, so you have Lyme, you definitely have co-infections. You want to treat first the thing that's bothering you the most, and just start there and like work out. So you may get rid of some symptoms, but then a new symptom pops up, or, that symptom that wasn't really bothering you now is bothering you more. So we would adjust his protocol based on his symptoms. And that was when we were clear that he didn't need the antibiotics anymore. And then we took him off the antibiotics, and it was very clear that he didn't get worse at that moment. He was still on the herbs. And so it was very clear to us what was, helping him.
How far would you say the combination of herbs and the cannabis recovered Keith's health?
I think he got maybe 50% better. It's hard to say. Like, we did herbs for a long time, probably a year. It's a little bit hard to say too, because at this point, Keith also needed double partial knee replacement. So it's like a difficult time because he was feeling better from the Lyme, not 100% yet at all, not even close, but definitely on the mend. But his knees were so bad he could barely walk. So he had to get this surgery, which then, of course, set him back a little bit more. And then once he did the herbal protocol, he was feeling better. He did his knee surgery because he had to go off everything for the knees. And then once he healed from the knees, then we felt like, oh, he could walk again without pain, and he could, he was stable, and he didn't really need the herbs anymore, but he wasn't nearly 100%.
For those listening that are interested in trying the herbs that Keith had used, where did you buy them? Were they online? Was there a specific brand of herbs that you purchased?
Yes. So in the Buhner book, and you can find a lot about his protocol online as well, there are often recommendations of where to get herbs. I know Mountain Rose Herbs was one of them. There's a company, some of them we just got on Amazon. There's a company in Hawaii that makes a bunch of the tinctures. I mean, and he was on so many things. It was crazy. Like the amount of pills and tinctures he would take in a day, 3 times a day. There was many. And there is an herbalist on Etsy as well, which you might not think to look at Etsy, but that does like the combination of the herbal, like the core protocol that Buhner recommends. Oh, and there's another one called I should talk about them because they were great. Green Dragon Botanicals, I believe. And they have a lot of the herbs that you need.
So Jennifer, how are you and the children doing at this time?
So at this time, I am trying to sell the business. And that is very like stressful, involved, experience. So the kids are doing okay. I think they're happy that, dad is around more. He's still at this point, he's still sleeping a lot, and he still has a sound sensitivity, but not to the same degree. So he's able to, hang out with them more. I am stressed and trying to sell this business and thinking about moving. So yeah, it was a bit of a crazy time. Happy that Keith seems stable, and stressed to, sell the business and move out of New York.
So Jen, what was triggering the decision to sell the business and to move again?
Well, after our experiences, I definitely felt like we needed a fresh start. That was part of it. I was, as much as I loved the business that I built, and happy that it's still thriving now under new ownership, I was done with that. I needed to move on to something else. And then the biggest reason was to get out of such an area with ticks. Like we wanted to find somewhere we could go where there was less Lyme. And Lyme is everywhere and ticks are everywhere, but we just didn't want to be in such a highly concentrated Lyme area. When you live in New York, especially upstate, you either know somebody with Lyme or they know somebody, everybody, there's like Lyme is only like once removed from you in any moment when you're talking with somebody. Everybody has Lyme or knows somebody with Lyme.
So you guys were packing up and moving because you wanted to outrun the Lyme.
Yeah.
How did you look when you looked in the mirror? What did you see looking back at you after this terrible journey that you and your family were on?
Well, I felt old and I felt worn out, and I hadn't been taking care of myself for a number of years, and I had gained weight that I couldn't lose. So I was just feeling old.
What did you do next? I mean, what was the next set of events that caused you to have the positive changes in your life?
So at this point, we sold the business, which was a huge relief. I trained the new owners. We sold our house. We bought a camper, and we all moved into the camper. My older daughter, is in college, and at this point she's graduated and working and on her own. So we packed up the 2 younger kids into the camper, and we decided, by selling the business, I had bought myself some time before I had to decide what I was doing next. So we decided to take a year and just travel the country and see where we would end up, see if we could find a place where, we felt like would be home. So, it was amazing. We, traveled down south, and then we traveled cross country. Both myself and Keith, were having still having health issues. We didn't feel healthy. We didn't, like I said, I felt old. Keith felt worn out. Still not, he was stable, but not 100% by any means. So, out of we just kept searching for something that would work. And then I found the keto diet and decided, even though, again, once you've gone through this thing, this, illness, this journey, you're willing to try anything. And keto sounded crazy. You see all the articles in the news, like, don't try keto, it will kill you, it's the worst diet, don't do it. But then on the other hand, you see all these people who are feeling better and they're losing weight, and people with autoimmune disease feeling better. And we decided to just, take the plunge and just try it. There is somebody I follow online who had brain cancer and was treating his brain cancer with keto, not just keto, but, he was, and felt like that was definitely part of his cure or his remission. So, I felt like if somebody has brain cancer and can try this diet, we could try it. So we do all the research and we start trying the keto diet, and we both immediately feel better. And the world is a little more clear. We both start losing weight effortlessly just by changing our diet, not adding in exercise. I mean, we're active, we move around a lot, but we're not big exercisers. So just by changing our diet, we start to feel better. But the same people that I was following with the brain cancer, they also would do the carnivore diet sometimes, and which sounded even more insane. But also everybody says it's a healing diet. So I start researching the carnivore diet, and we find this woman, Charlene Anderson, who 21 years ago cured her Lyme, or put her Lyme in remission, however you want to say that, through the carnivore diet. So, she tried antibiotics, she tried herbs, she tried a number of different things. And finally, her and her husband said, let's try nutrition. Let's see if maybe we can, this has got to be the piece that's important. So
But Jen, I just want to interrupt you here and walk you back to the keto diet. So did you look for a dietary change that was going to be helpful to your husband, or were you looking for a dietary change that would be helpful to you, or something else?
Well, I have to admit, it was more about vanity than anything else. As I said, I was feeling old at 45 years old. I was feeling old. I, had gained weight. I didn't, couldn't lose. So I really just didn't want to keep going on that path where I felt, old and I wasn't happy with the way I was looking. Also, though, my own fatigue and, that definitely came into play, especially when you start to read these stories like, I would look into it and see, oh, wait, great. I could effortlessly lose weight. Okay. That's what I'm looking for. And then, oh, wait a minute, look at this person. They have an autoimmune disease and they feel better. And this person has brain cancer and it helped in his recovery. Like, this sounds amazing. So
you were looking for something to help you improve your health. And as you began to do your research and your investigation, you came to the conclusion that it might be helpful to your husband as well.
Yes, definitely.
So now, for those of our listeners who are not familiar with the keto diet, can you explain generally what the keto diet is and how it was different from the diet that you were using prior to the discovery of the keto diet?
Sure. So, at no point in our Lyme journey did we try any special diet. We just ate the regular standard American diet. I think it was never suggested to us to use nutrition. I know now there's, more recommendations about cutting out sugar and gluten and grains for people who have Lyme. But back then it wasn't suggested to us at any point to try nutrition. And it wasn't like, we never even thought to try it. And I think sometimes, I know sometimes when you have Lyme, it's hard to figure out what you even want to eat and what you can eat. So we just, Keith just ate what he could, And I didn't have any, I didn't have Lyme, so I didn't have any special diet. So for keto, it's a low carb, high fat diet. You want to keep your carbs to 20 grams or less for the day. You cut out sugar, and you cut out grains. You don't eat bread. I mean, that you can make keto bread, but it's not actual bread as we know it. And that's pretty much it. The biggest part is making sure you have enough fat. And a lot of people on keto will eat a lot of avocados and use avocado oil, and you can make bulletproof coffee where you put in different oils and butter and things to make sure you're getting enough fat. And then the thing in the keto diet is that if you're eating carbs and sugars, those things spike your insulin, and that is what causes you to gain weight and to not be able to lose weight. So you want to keep your insulin levels very stable.
So was it difficult for you to pivot from the diet that you were using to the now keto diet that you and your husband were utilizing?
There was a bit of a learning curve. I am a foodie. I love food. And I love, wine and beer and, bread and chocolate and sugar. Keith is more of like a salty snack kind of person. So he likes all that kind of potato chips and popcorn and things like that. We were both beer drinkers. So there was a learning curve, and there was a 2-week kind of adaptation period. They call it the keto flu, where you might not feel well. It's not horrible. And you can take electrolytes, which kind of help you get through it. But, there was that period where, I'd feel nauseous, or, I did have heart palpitations for a little while my electrolytes were kind of balancing out. And things that maybe, would kind of give you pause and say, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. I don't feel great. But then there are days when you feel amazing and you know what's coming, and you can tell, like, oh, if I can just wait out these 2 weeks, if I can feel like this every day, it's going to be amazing. So, there was an adaptation, but it wasn't too difficult because you start to feel great.
So, Jen, when you were doing the research on the keto diet, did you come across anyone who is using the diet to treat or as a part of the treatment protocol for their Lyme disease? Because I know Tim Ferriss, the author of the 4-Hour Work Week, has credited the keto diet with curing his Lyme disease.
Yes, I don't really follow him that much, but somebody I'm friends with does, and did mention him to me. And yeah, so I knew of him, but beyond him, I did not know anybody specifically using keto for Lyme. And I think that's probably part of the reason why we went carnivore, is because we found, Charlene Anderson, and then there's a couple other people who used carnivore for Lyme.
Well, so now talk to us about that pivot. Why did you pivot from the diet that seemed to be working well for both you and your husband? And I think we should highlight that he's on the herbal protocol. He's doing well. He now goes on to keto. He's now doing some dietary intervention, and he uses the keto diet. He's getting even better. So now you're taking another step. And why did you take that step? And how was it different to be on the carnivore diet than on the keto diet?
I think the experience of seeing that, here's this diet where you'll be warned not to do it, and it absolutely works, and it's amazing, and it's not dangerous, and it's safe. And through that experience, to say, okay, well, this worked. Here's this other crazy diet that's related, because, people who do keto will go carnivore, even for just a time. Or there's people within the keto community that do animal food keto, or keto, whatever they're calling it at this point, where it's heavy in animal foods, will go carnivore. So it's related within the community. So, once you start researching keto and you start to see these carnivore stories of people who are reversing autoimmune issues and Lyme issues, you say, okay, well, let's try it. It sounds crazy. If we hate it, we can always stop. But let's give it a try, because this might work for us. And, Keith is not better at this point. Like at this point, he's only taking cannabis. He's not taking anything else. We're doing keto and he's better, but he's not better.
So Jen, I'm just not clear just on the timeline. So is this before you discovered Buhner and the herbal protocol? Is this after Buhner and the herbal protocol?
This is after. So this is in March will be a year of carnivore. And, we were keto. We were only keto for a month, maybe a little over a month before we started carnivore. So this was a year ago exactly.
I'm sorry, Jen. I'm still not clear on the difference between the keto and the carnivore diets. How would you describe the differences between the two?
Okay. Yes. So the carnivore diet, you can also call it the zero carb diet, is you remove all carbs from your diet. And basically you remove all plant foods. It is only animal-based foods. There are different ways of doing carnivore. The way we do carnivore is we just eat beef and drink water. You can do, some people include eggs, some people include dairy, and then, everybody includes meat. You look for fatty meats. So, chicken, sure, you can eat chicken. You definitely want to leave the skin on, and you're probably going to eat the legs, but you're not going to eat so much the breast because it doesn't have as much fat. But it's mostly ruminant meat. So it's, beef, lamb. Some people eat duck. Some people include fish. And then there's a whole movement of people who eat nose to tail. So they think it's important that you eat, liver and, other organ meats. I prefer to keep things very simple. The people who have been doing the carnivore diet the longest, people who've been doing it 8 years, 10 years, 20 years, most of them all just keep it simple and don't care about eating organ meat. So they just eat beef and bacon and that's it.
I'm fascinated by this. So that's what I'm going to ask. So for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, all you eat is beef.
Yes, but we don't really eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner anymore. I know it sounds crazy, and especially to me, who was such a foodie and loved, all kinds of food, but something changes. And I pretty much only eat one meal a day or maybe 2 meals a day where, you're not hungry. You don't snack. You don't need to eat as much as you did before. And so my main, thing that I eat is I'll eat I haven't eaten yet today. I'll probably eat closer to 2:00 maybe. And I'll eat a steak and some bacon. And usually ribeye because that has the fat. Again, this is all about fat. So you want to make sure you have enough fat. If I have enough fat, I don't have sugar cravings. I don't crave any other food. But if I don't have enough fat, then I could have a sugar craving. And that's it. I use butter and I drink water. So we go from keto to carnivore. Keith was on the fence about it because, again, it sounds insane. And he wasn't a huge steak eater. He doesn't love, or he didn't, now he does, but he didn't love beef, So it was kind of okay, we're just going to hold our nose and do it. Within a couple weeks, just Keith's health transformation was incredible. His color came back. We both lost weight. We're both now back to what we weighed in high school. Just his mood changed. His social anxiety went away. Pain left. Brain fog left. I didn't consider myself sick. I didn't have chronic Lyme. I didn't have Lyme ever, but I had a brain fog that lifted that I didn't even know I had. People who haven't seen Keith in years, friends and family, they see Keith and they say, wow, Keith's back. And it was, in my opinion, nothing short of a miracle. It was amazing.
So how is Keith doing today?
I would say he's between 90 and 95% better. He has an occasional flare if it rains, and even his flares now are more manageable than before. They don't last. We can kind of predict when they're coming. He can up his fat intake a little bit to see if that can kind of help, alleviate the flare. But beyond those, few and far between flares, his energy is back. His, like I said, his coloring is back. It was so weird to think back now because I can see the difference, but I felt like now that I see his color came back, it was like he was gray for so many years, and he's able to play music. He's going to coach the basketball team here in Joshua Tree for the kids. Like, he's back, and it's amazing.
How has this all changed you, Jen? I mean, it's an unbelievable transformational story about your husband who went from being a zombie to being back to being your husband again. How has this all changed you, and how are you different as a consequence of this Lyme journey that you've been on with your husband?
Well, when I sold my business, I knew that I would want to do something new, but I didn't quite know what that was. And I had this idea that I wanted to help people who had been through similar experiences. So at first I thought I'd be an herbalist because of the Buhner protocol and how that, absolutely in my mind saved Keith's life. But when I saw how the nutritional changes brought him back, then I decided I wanted to study to become a health coach so I could help people, reach remission quicker, by using, nutrition and then, other lifestyle changes and, movement and, potentially herbs based on what they've been using so far. So based on what we've learned, what works to help others. So, so I'm starting to work with people who have chronic Lyme and hopefully help them get to remission quicker than we did. And so they don't have to take this very long journey to get back to health.
So now you are currently a certified health coach. What type of an educational program did you have to complete to become the coach that you've now become?
So I went through the Primal Health Coach Institute, and it's based on a more, ancestral eating alignment where, again, low carbs, no sugar.
So Jen, I understand you're also working on some other really cool stuff as part of the personal transformation you've gone through. And I believe that you've been interacting with people who are suffering from chronic Lyme disease in an effort to try to see if any patterns are developing when you're doing these interviews.
Yes. So interestingly, like now that I'm awake to this world of coaching, I'm working with a business coach to help me, and she's specific for the health community. So she's a health coach. And part of our work was to interview people who have chronic Lyme to connect with the community. And I feel like these days, like, we're so focused on being online, like personal interaction has kind of gone out the window a bit. So it was interesting to set up these phone calls with strangers I don't know off the internet. And it was amazing to find all these people willing to talk to me, on the phone, just by posting in a few Facebook groups. I think the sad part of that is just that there are so many people suffering from chronic Lyme. It's mind-blowing, but it was pretty amazing to talk to people who had been there or who are going through it and who understand, and you understand what they're going through, and they understand, you understand what they're going through, and to compare notes and to just listen to each other. And it was pretty amazing. It's interesting because some of the other health coaches in other, areas, not Lyme, were having trouble finding people to interview, and, which I thought was interesting, with Lyme, I had way more people than I was originally looking for. So it was pretty clear to me that, you know, there's a lot of people suffering and there's a lot of people who want to be heard. And I wanted to provide, you know, a space for that. So I'm keeping the interviews going, even though, you know, I'm done with my assignment, just because I feel like it's really good to connect. And then I provided a phone number and, you know, just my email address. And I'm looking for people to come and, you know, leave a message or send me an email with the answer to this question. And it's, you know, what is the one main thing you'd like people to know about chronic Lyme? And I'm going to take all of these responses and share them on social media. And also, you know, I'm hoping one day to just put them together into a book or even just on a website, just so people opinions and things that they want you to know about chronic Lyme is recorded. And, you know, I think it's super powerful when you have, you know, a collection of these and you can hear similarities in people's experiences. You know, how many people have been told that this is all in their head? How many people have gone through it and their loved ones don't believe them? And then the differences, you know, I have someone I talked to who's convinced she got Lyme through a spider bite. And I've never heard that one before, you know, and just the things that people want to share, you know, helpful things. Like I talked to one guy and he said, you know, I just want people to know that they need to study, and if they, you know, keep at it, they'll find the thing that's going to work for them. So it's been pretty amazing to connect with people and to hear, you know, what they want others to know about their experience.
So Jen, I have one final question for you, and you've been very kind to share so much of your time and your insight with us, but I do have one last question. If, God forbid, tomorrow, one of your children came into the house and they had a tick biting them on the leg, what would you do to make sure that child did not suffer from the terrible disease that their father had suffered from?
So I would first remove the tick properly to make sure it all comes out without, you know, squeezing it or trying to put something on the tick that makes the tick, you know, release more into your body. And I would save the tick and have it tested, although that's kind of, in my opinion, not super helpful. You have to assume that the tick had Lyme. You just have to. And then I would use the Stephen Buhner has both a prevention, you know, guidelines, and then, you know, if you have a bite, you know, if you live in a Lyme, you know, high Lyme area, you should be taking astragalus every day, especially during tick season, although you can get it in any season, so really year round. And then on the bite area, you can put andrographis tincture and green clay, and you just leave that on the bite area, and that will hopefully prevent an infection. And then you would up your doses of the astragalus. And then I would also take them to the doctor and get antibiotics. So I would try to hit it from both the herbal and the antibiotic side.
Thank you for listening to the Tick Bootcamp interview with Jennifer Gladysz. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Jennifer Gladysz and the carnivore diet, please visit our Instagram page at BeHolyHuman. Second, if you enjoyed this episode of the Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share it with your friends by using the social media buttons you see at the bottom of the post. Third, we here at Tick Bootcamp have created a Tick Bite Blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been shared with us by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at www.tickbootcamp.com to view the blueprint. We would appreciate it if you would contact us with any suggestions you have for improvements. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, or Spotify to get the automatic episode updates of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. And finally, we thank our listeners for your comments on our past podcast episodes. Please take a minute to leave us an honest review on iTunes, on Instagram, or on our website. We make it a point to read every single one of the reviews we get. Thank you for listening.